What if the Knights Templar never truly disappeared? What if their story did not end with fire and ashes, but continued quietly, hidden in bloodlines, traditions, and whispered loyalties that still exist today? It sounds like the opening of a legend, but to understand why this idea refuses to fade, we have to return to the beginning, to a time of chaos, faith, and opportunity, when a small group of knights laid the foundations for one of the most powerful and mysterious orders in history. The world of the early 12th century was defined by pilgrimage and peril. Jerusalem had fallen into Christian hands after the First Crusade, and thousands of pilgrims began making the long journey from Europe to the Holy Land. It was a journey filled with danger. Bandits waited along roads. Lawless territories offered no protection. Many never arrived. Into this dangerous world stepped a handful of knights. They were not kings or nobles of great standing. They were experienced warriors who saw both a problem and a purpose. Their solution was simple. They would protect pilgrims. Their mission was sacred. Their resources were almost non-existent. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The name itself revealed both humility and ambition. Poor, because they owned nothing as individuals. Soldiers of Christ, because their loyalty was to faith rather than fortune. And of the Temple, because they were granted quarters near what was believed to be the ruins of Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem. From the very beginning, location mattered. That site carried immense symbolic weight. It was tied to biblical kings, divine wisdom, and lost relics. Even before legends took hold, the setting alone sparked imagination. At first, the order was small and obscure. For nearly a decade, they operated quietly. They patrolled roads, they escorted pilgrims, they lived under strict vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. There were no grand castles, no shining treasuries, no banners carried into battle. Then everything changed. Church leaders recognized the value of a disciplined, permanent fighting force devoted to religious duty. PayPal support followed. Donations followed that. Land followed soon after. What began as a humble brotherhood grew into a structured institution with international reach. This growth happened fast. Within a generation, the Knights Templar were everywhere. France, England, Iberia, Italy, the Holy Land. Their Red Cross became a familiar sight. Their reputation for discipline and fearlessness grew with every campaign. But something else grew alongside it: secrecy. The Templars were monks and warriors at the same time. This made them unusual, even unsettling. Their internal rules were strict and private, their meetings closed, their rituals unseen by outsiders, their loyalty absolute. In a medieval society built on public displays of faith and hierarchy, this inward focus stood out. The Templars also answered directly to the Pope, bypassing local bishops and kings. This gave them independence few institutions enjoyed. It also meant their affairs were often invisible to regional authorities. They were inside society, but not entirely of it. As the Crusades continued, the Templars gained experience, wealth, and influence. They learned how to manage supply lines across continents. They developed financial systems that allowed money to move safely over long distances. They built fortresses that were engineering marvels. And through it all, they remained a brotherhood. Membership was not inherited, it was earned. A man left his former life behind and became part of something larger. Family ties were replaced by loyalty to the order. Or so it appeared. In reality, many Templars came from noble families. Younger sons, often with limited inheritance prospects, joined the order. While vows demanded renunciation of personal wealth, family connections did not vanish overnight. Over time, these connections formed networks. Brothers joined, cousins followed. Families became known for producing Templars generation after generation. Although the order itself rejected hereditary succession, human nature ensured that lineage still mattered. This is where the idea of secret Templar bloodlines begins to form. Not as a grand conspiracy, but as a quiet reality. Families whose members served together, regions where Templar influence was strong, traditions passed down not as official doctrine, but as shared memory. At the same time, the Templars' exposure to the wider world expanded. In the Holy Land, they encountered Islamic scholars, Eastern Christians, and ancient traditions preserved outside Western Europe. They learned new approaches to medicine, architecture, mathematics, and governance. This knowledge gave them an edge. It also made them different. To outsiders, the Templars seemed unusually competent. Their discipline bordered on intimidating. Their coordination was precise, their silence unbroken. When asked questions, they often answered only what was necessary. Silence invites speculation. People began to imagine what might be hidden behind closed doors. If the Templars were so organized, perhaps they knew something others did not. If they were so successful, perhaps they had guidance beyond ordinary faith. These were not accusations yet. They were curiosities. But curiosity has momentum. As the order expanded, so did the belief that it was more than it appeared. That beneath the armor and prayers lay something older. Something inherited. Something passed down from the earliest days, perhaps even earlier. Legends began to attach themselves to the Temple Mount. Stories of underground chambers, of relics discovered, of ancient wisdom recovered from the ruins of Solomon's temple. No contemporary evidence confirms these tales. But stories do not need proof to survive. They need only fertile ground, and the Templars provided it. By the late 12th century, the order had become indispensable. Kings relied on them. Popes trusted them. Merchants used their services. Pilgrims depended on their protection. They were everywhere, yet somehow distant. That combination, visibility and mystery, power and restraint, made the Templars more than an institution. It made them a symbol, and symbols endure. Even as military fortunes shifted and the Crusades began to falter, the Templars remained. Their original mission weakened, but their infrastructure did not. Their castles stood firm. Their financial networks remained active. Their influence continued. This raised an uncomfortable question. If the Holy Land was being lost, what was the purpose of the Templars now? The answer was not clear, even to their supporters. As pressure mounted, the order grew more insular. Loyalty became more important. Silence more necessary. Trust more limited. In times of uncertainty, brotherhoods tighten inward, and this inward turn would have consequences, because when the Templars were eventually accused, arrested, and destroyed, they did not vanish in a single moment. Some escaped, some were absorbed into other orders, some returned quietly to family lands, some disappeared entirely from the historical record, and with them went stories of survival, of secret oaths still honored, of families that remembered, of traditions preserved quietly, stripped of banners and titles, but not of identity. The question is not whether the Knights Templar officially survived. They did not. The question is whether pieces of them did. Through people, through families, through ideas that outlived the institution itself. And if so, how far into the present those echoes may still reach. That is where the real mystery begins. At their peak, the Knights Templar were no longer just warriors of the faith. They had become administrators, financiers, diplomats, and power brokers on a scale medieval Europe had never seen. And it was during this height of influence that the idea of secret Templar lineages truly began to take shape. By the early 13th century, the Templars operated like a multinational organization. They owned land across Europe and the Mediterranean. Their network of commanderies acted as regional hubs, managing resources, collecting rents, training recruits, and communicating with one another through trusted couriers. Information moved quickly within the order. Money moved even faster. Kings deposited treasure with the Templars for safekeeping. Nobles entrusted them with wills and inheritances. Pilgrims relied on their letters of credit to travel safely across continents. This placed the Templars at the heart of political and economic life. And yet, much of their work happened quietly. They did not rule territories openly. They did not seek crowns. They did not build dynasties in the traditional sense. Instead, they built systems, and systems outlast individuals. This is where lineage becomes less about blood and more about continuity. Within the order, loyalty was reinforced daily. Brothers lived, trained, prayed, and fought together. Decisions were made collectively. Discipline was absolute. Individual identity mattered far less than belonging. This created something rare in medieval society, an identity that transcended family. But family did not disappear entirely. Many Templars came from noble houses that already had influence. When one son joined the order, it raised the family's prestige. When another followed, it strengthened ties. Over time, certain regions became associated with Templar service. Southern France, parts of Spain, Portugal, and England saw repeated generations of men entering the order from the same social circles. These were not official bloodlines, but patterns. When a knight joined, he left his inheritance behind, but his family did not stop benefiting from his position. Favor flowed both ways. Trust was built. Relationships deepened. If the order needed local support, these families provided it. If families needed protection or mediation, the order offered it. This quiet interdependence laid the groundwork for something more enduring. As the Templars interacted with Islamic states, Byzantine authorities, and Eastern Christian communities, they encountered alternative forms of governance and knowledge. They learned how other cultures preserved tradition without written law alone. Through ritual, memory, and lineage, the Templars adapted. They recorded much, but not everything. Certain teachings were conveyed orally. Certain practices were demonstrated, not explained. This was not necessarily secrecy in a conspiratorial sense. It was practicality. Writing was slow. Documents could be lost or stolen. Oral tradition was resilient. These traditions created continuity within the order, and continuity breeds lineage, even without blood. At the same time, myths flourished outside their walls. People began to claim the Templars had inner circles, groups within the group, trusted guardians of deeper knowledge. Whether true or not, the belief itself mattered. When an institution is believed to have layers, people assume survival is possible even after apparent destruction. The Templars' castles added to this belief. Their fortresses were not just military strongholds, they were logistical centers with storage rooms, chapels, archives, and escape routes. Some had tunnels. Others had secret passages. When these sites were later abandoned or seized, Locals told stories of what might have been removed before authorities arrived. Treasure, documents, relics, and perhaps people. The idea that Templars vanished rather than surrendered took hold early. In some regions, this belief was reinforced by events. In Portugal, the order was officially dissolved, yet quickly reconstituted under a new name, the Order of Christ. Many former Templars simply changed insignia and continued their work. In Spain, similar transitions occurred. The Order of Manassa absorbed Templar lands and members. In these cases, continuity was open, legal, and recorded. But elsewhere, continuity was quieter. In Scotland, where royal authority was weak and church politics complicated, the suppression of the Templars was uneven. Later, legends would claim Templars fought alongside Scottish forces, preserving their brotherhood under new identities. These stories are difficult to prove, but they persist for a reason. When institutions collapse suddenly, survivors adapt. Some Templars likely returned to family estates. Others joined different orders. Some may have entered secular life, carrying with them habits, symbols, and loyalties shaped by years of discipline. If they had families, those families inherited more than land. They inherited stories, and stories are powerful. Over generations, these stories can transform into claims of descent, not always literal, but spiritual. A belief that one's ancestors were guardians of something greater, that they were entrusted with a role, even after the banners fell. This belief does not require formal organization to survive. It requires memory. As centuries passed, medieval institutions faded, but Romanticism grew. Writers and antiquarians began to reimagine the Templars as keepers of hidden truths. Secret brotherhoods claimed lineage. Masonic traditions drew symbolic connections, not necessarily historical ones, but compelling enough to sustain belief. Some modern groups would later claim direct descent from the Templars, offering genealogies and rituals as evidence. Historians remain skeptical. The gaps are too large, the documentation too thin. Yet the persistence of these claims says something important. The Templars left a cultural imprint strong enough that people wanted to belong to it long after it ended. That desire fuels lineage myths. Whether through blood, tradition, or ideology, the idea of Templar survival became a way to connect with a powerful past, a way to believe that something noble, disciplined, and purposeful endured beneath the surface of history. And in a world increasingly shaped by institutions that rise and fall, the notion that a brotherhood could outlive its destruction holds undeniable appeal. But belief alone does not make something true. The final question remains: when the Templars fell, was there anything left to pass on? Or were the lineages that followed simply shadows cast by memory and imagination? To answer that, we must return to the moment of collapse itself and examine what happened when the order was finally broken. Because it is in endings, not beginnings, that survival is truly tested. The end came suddenly, and yet, in hindsight, it had been building for years. On a single morning, across much of Europe, the Knights Templar were arrested. Their houses were seized, their leaders imprisoned, their reputation shattered overnight. What followed was not a battle, but a campaign of accusations, confessions, and fear. The order was dismantled by decree, not defeated in war. For many, this abrupt collapse raised an immediate question. How could an organization so powerful simply vanish? And more importantly, did it truly vanish at all? Officially, the answer was clear. The Knights Templar were dissolved, their property transferred, their name erased, their leaders executed or imprisoned. By law and by church authority, the order ceased to exist. But history is rarely so neat. When the arrests began, not every Templar was captured. Some were warned in advance. Some were in regions where enforcement was weak. Some had powerful allies who delayed action. Records show that in certain areas the arrests were incomplete or half-hearted. This created space for survival. Survival did not mean resistance, it meant adaptation. Many former Templars faded quietly into society. They returned to family lands. They joined other religious orders. They took positions as administrators, advisors, or soldiers under new banners. Their skills were still valuable, their discipline still respected. What they lost was their identity as Templars. Or so it seemed. Identity does not vanish simply because a title is removed. Years of shared life, ritual, and loyalty leave marks. Former Templars carried habits of thought and action that set them apart. They knew how to organize, how to communicate discreetly, how to trust selectively. These traits can be passed on, not genetically, but culturally. This is where lineage shifts from bloodline to mindset. Families who sheltered former Templars became guardians of memory. Not official records, but stories told quietly. A grandfather who spoke of the old days, a symbol carved into a beam, a tradition maintained without explanation. Over generations, these fragments could evolve into identity. In regions like Portugal and Spain, continuity was almost transparent. The Templars were absorbed into new orders with papal approval. Their members, lands, and traditions continued under different names. In these cases, lineage is not speculation, it is documented. Elsewhere, the picture is less clear. Scotland, often cited in legends, was politically isolated and in conflict with the English crown. The suppression of the Templars there appears to have been inconsistent. Later stories would claim that Templar knights found refuge and continued their brotherhood in secret. While definitive proof is lacking, the context makes survival plausible. The same applies to parts of southern France, where loyalty to the crown was uneven and local networks were strong. In such places, it would not have been difficult for former Templars to disappear into familiar territory. What they carried with them was not an order, but a worldview. This worldview valued loyalty over ambition, structure over chaos, purpose over reward. These values could be taught, passed on, adapted. Centuries later, groups seeking legitimacy or mystique would claim descent from the Templars. Some traced genealogies, others adopted symbols. Many borrowed rituals. Historians rightly question these claims. Most cannot be verified, but the question of lineage does not rest solely on documentation. It rests on influence. The Templars demonstrated that power could exist outside royal inheritance, that institutions could span borders, that discipline could rival bloodline. These ideas survived them. Modern organizations, from banks to multinational orders, echo Templar structures, not because they inherited secrets, but because they inherited concepts. The idea of a secret lineage often arises when people search for continuity in a broken past. The sudden destruction of the Templars created a vacuum. In that vacuum, imagination worked to restore balance. If something so formidable could vanish, then perhaps it did not vanish entirely. This belief does not require conspiracy. It requires meaning. And the Templars provided plenty of it. Their dramatic end, their silence, their unresolved accusations, all fed the sense that something was unfinished, that a story had been interrupted, not concluded. So do secret Templar lineages still exist? Not as hidden armies or clandestine orders operating in the shadows. There is no credible evidence of that, but as influences, values, and traditions. The answer is more complex. They exist in stories passed down through families who once served them, in institutions that mirror their methods, in symbols that continue to fascinate, in the human desire to believe that purpose can survive destruction. The true legacy of the Knights Templar is not a secret bloodline. It is an idea. That belief, loyalty, and structure can bind people together across generations. That identity can endure even when names are erased. That history does not always end where the records stop. In the end, the Templars did not survive as an order. They survived as a question. And as long as people continue to ask whether something meaningful can outlive its fall, the echo of the Knights Templar will remain.